Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for volume 26, which is Unital Ring 5. So the 5th volume of Unital Ring, volume 26 overall of Sword Art Online. So I think the English release date is today, March 21st. I got it yesterday, it arrived a day early. So, yeah, we're 5 volumes in, that's a significant amount, but have we really made any progress? And I think this is obviously, the frustration with this arc overall, is that there's a lot going on. There is a lot of subplots, different kind of locations, basically, avenues of exploration that we can explore here, and it's very broad, very wide. There's a lot going on. Ultimately, do we get that many answers here? Not really. We make progress. There is a significant scene here that you can tell is going to, at least this character introduction is important for later on, but it still feels like it's ultimately just putting off reveals until a little later on. And that's sort of, I think, the impression I get from a lot of people with some of these volumes is that even Kawahara says it himself in like the afterword, that, it's about time for the story of these two worlds to really begin heating up toward the climax. But I keep finding more things I need to write and things I want to write. And I put myself in the difficult position of having to choose what to include or not to include. Not that that's any different from usual. And I think the problem is that that is beginning to happen like every single volume. Really cool cliffhanger from the previous volume, and it takes like the entirety of this volume just to sort of bring that to a situation where we can finally explore it. In that, in this volume, the really frustrating part of it is that we ended last volume with the idea that we find Selka along with Ronnie NTS frozen in the kind of deep freeze, and it takes the whole volume to actually get them out of the deep freeze. Now, some of the stuff that happens along the way is interesting, but it still remains the fact that it's just like we are not actually going to get interactions properly with Selka, Ronnie, and NTS until the next volume. So the volume 25 cliffhanger takes until volume 27 to actually get some focus. That's sort of the problem, and I get the impression, based on the little I've heard about volume 27, is that something very similar happens with the next volume. That he originally planned it to be about this and reveals about this, and then that didn't really end up happening. So, look, I get it. It's a big arc, and the reason it's big is because, one, we have Unital Ring itself. That's our game. That is what is basically SAO, ALO. It's all the seed games kind of merged together. That's what we're dealing with here. That's the kind of uniqueness of this new arc. The mystery of like why this happened in the first place, and what the quest at the end is actually about. The idea that apparently if you get to the center of the map, you will receive everything effectively, something along those lines. That's what they've been teasing in nearly every volume. What's that about? What are we trying to do there? We have the Underworld, which is still in play, but it is separate than Unital Ring. Now, I think you would assume that at some point we'll maybe merge this world into Unital Ring or something like that. But for now, it is separate, but it's still an important part of the story. And we are doing stuff here, of course, because we can't just leave the Underworld behind after how important it was in the previous arc. But then there's also the fact that a decent amount of time has passed in the Underworld. So we have present-day Underworld with these characters that we met in like the previous volume and stuff like that. But then we also are dealing with the fact that Kirito and Asuna and Alice are part of the history of this world, because they are the Star King and Queen and also the Golden Knight. They are legendary figures here, and they spent a large amount of time that they now don't remember in this world. So there is some sense that like the whole Moon Cradle stuff is beginning to come into play here in a kind of more world building sense in Underworld. And it's like, straight away there's like 3 kind of plot avenues, plus we can still do stuff in the real world as well. So there's 4 kind of almost like different kind of eras or kind of like approaches that we can do here. And you can tell that Reiki Kawahara is struggling with how much focus to give each one. Because what happens in this, in terms of like Unital Ring, yes, we make progress, and there's kind of 1 or 2 interesting kind of reveals, but the Unital Ring stuff is all kind of led by Silica. That's why Silica's on the cover here. She gets the focus in the Unital Ring stuff, because Kirito, Asuna, Alice are all in the Underworld for the entirety of this volume. So, to establish that we're still making progress with the important Unital Ring plot, this is where like the rest of the characters come into play, with Silica kind of being the lead of it. Kind of Silica, Sinon as the focus, but you know, Lisbeth, Klein, Egil are here as well, along with a lot of the other players that are in or around kind of Rusna Rig. And we basically get the setup and reveal of effectively like the layout of the map is kind of explained to us here. That like it's explained that like it's in this kind of like stepped kind of situation where you have to basically defeat a boss to go up some sort of a either ladder kind of internal dungeon to get up to the next step. And so they realized that, oh, well, what have you heard? What have some of the other players heard? Because, of course, they freed a bunch of players from Mudasina in the previous volume, and they have information about the game in a broader sense. And so it's revealed that actually some of the other wedges on the map from other games have actually cleared the first section. That they're getting closer to the middle. So the idea is like it's this kind of ringed overall thing with wedges, but then within each wedge there's like a step situation as you get closer to the middle. So it gets higher and you get further into the middle. So a few of the games that have actually managed to work together as an entire community have already like ascended that first level. So it's actually revealed that because of Mudasina effectively and the issues she's caused amongst the ALO player base and everything that's happened, they're behind. But Rusna Rig is established to be probably one of the best bases set up in the game in terms of how large it is, how much potential there is with where it is, that when they finally get up to the next level, they'll have a much better sort of, you know, kind of logistics system set up for getting stuff from the lower levels to the higher levels, and so they can make up the ground. But they need to get there in the first place, and so they set up the idea that, okay, there's some sort of a boss-like situation that we need to do to get up to the next stage. And this is where, from the patter, I think it's basically, they find out that, oh, hey, in the past, it was actually these giant wasps, these kind of green wasp things. They were the ones who actually basically like they massacred us in the past, and we had to flee for our lives, and that's why we're here. That's where you found us, but we actually used to live like way over here, and it's because of these wasps that this happened. So there's kind of a reason here for them to, you know, interact with the patter, because the patter actually know the weakness of the wasps. They're just not strong enough to go ahead with it themselves. And so the idea here is that the boss is effectively a whole kind of like hive of wasps. Now they assume there's a boss somewhere in the middle, and that actually ends up being true. But the whole point here is that it's just a huge amount of standard wasp kind of enemies, worker wasps. And if they just attack, it's going to be a real problem. They have to deal with the amount of basically ads that they have to clear here. And so they come up with this idea that, okay, so what we're going to have to do is basically poison them. If we use this poison from the Lobella flower, it's a bit SAO reference to a flower in that game, that if you put it on the flowers that the wasps usually kind of feed from, they'll all be poisoned. That will allow us to get in close and attack them while they're out, and just establish a better kind of way to attack. And that's what we're all about here. We just set up this kind of like stealth infiltration part where they have to stealthily poison the flowers in between wasps actually going to kind of feed on the flowers. And so this is what happens. It's a pretty large scale kind of almost boss raid style thing. And for the most part, it seems like it goes well. It's actually one of the patter kind of NPCs who ends up getting caught. So there's a real sense that for the most part, a lot of the players aren't really at risk because they're playing safe. They know that they want to stay in the fight here. Because of the planning they've done ahead of times, they know what to expect. But the risk here is that this NPC might die if it takes too long to win this fight. And so they're trying to just do it because of that. I wouldn't say this fight is anything particularly fancy in that, like, okay, eventually the queen wasp comes out, and a couple of soldier wasps as well. And so this is the actual kind of boss fight in all of this. Now, they have, of course, have their animal companions that have been set up from the previous volumes with them as sort of like powerful allies. So the bear that they have is controlled by Silica. And this comes in to help save the day a bit. Like, this does quite a bit of damage initially. But of course, the boss wasp is revealed to have a couple of special attacks. A scream that basically removes the poison debuff from the other wasp. So things get a bit chaotic in the middle of this battle. The other point here is that these are flying enemies. So there's a bit of a trouble with, we're on the ground, how do we get high enough to actually do damage to these? Because Xenon can do damage because she has some ranged weapons, but she has kind of limited ammunition, so she can do damage. A few of the players who can kind of get up slightly higher can do sort of skills that like move them quite a bit of distance, but they're still just barely doing kind of enough damage here. So it all leads up to basically the defeat of the boss. Is Silica comes up with the idea of like, okay, well, what we're going to have to do is, while it's flying, aim for the wings, and if we take the wings out, the animal will come down eventually. The boss will have to drop. We'll be on the ground sort of like waiting for it to drop. And what we're going to do is, we have to, this is like our one chance to defeat this with the amount of enemies around. The poisoning has worn off. So what happens is the bug drops, and Silica gets everyone to be like, hey, have your weapon kind of like ready, and it's a sort of complicated procedure, but effectively it's the idea of have your weapon over your head and have it just on the verge of slamming down once the thing hits the ground. But when it does, swap what weapon you're holding out to your like high level equipment that you have held onto, but you can't properly equip yet. So this is the whole Xenon with the sniper rifle situation, just with everyone else with their sort of bladed weapons. So they go from their basic stuff that can do okay damage to the high level weaponry, which they're basically now just guiding down while they're already doing a slash. So the idea here is that the boss sort of gets straight from like 75 HP to 0 because like 10 players have surrounded it and just delivered a devastating blow with high level weapons, and so that's how the fight comes to an end. It's one of those ones where like I appreciate what's going on here, and like I like that they've given focus to some of the other characters. It's not like anything I think super amazing. But say for when the anime finally gets around to doing this, it's going to make for a nice kind of like change of pace. That we actually get the other characters kind of doing some stuff, while Kirito and Asuna and Alice are not really here to help as such. So they've at least made progress, and the idea here is that from here we should be able to go up to sort of almost like the next step, and we're actually making progress inside the game. So now we have a broader sense for like what exactly we're doing and stuff like that, and that's, you know, sort of interesting. But there's nothing, you know, too particularly crazy going on here. You know, Silica gets to be the main character here. Like I said, it's sort of a combination of like Xenon is the one who's actually the quote unquote like raid party leader. But Silica comes up with some of the ideas in the middle of this as well. And, you know, it's just about the kind of like two of them realizing that like we maybe don't have the same level of creativity of Kirito in the way he deals with some of these situations, but we have a little bit of that because we've known him for a certain amount of time. And it's just the way they come up with the plan is quite clever. Everyone sort of quickly realizes the unique situation they need to do to resolve it. So that's the whole Unital Ring section. It's just sort of like ends a little bit in kind of mid-air overall. There's nothing kind of too much to say there, really. The whole book is very much like cutting back and forth. Like, it's one Silica chapter, then we're back in the Underworld, and we're just going back and forth. As far as the Underworld plot goes, again, it is also a situation where we, take our time to get through this plot, like I said. So we straight away, we find Silica, so Selka, of course, here. And also, this is where we do get the full confirmation. The other two knights that we have here are, in fact, Ronier and Ties, or Tise, that they're here. There's a bit of a discussion about, like, okay, they're older, but they're not as old as they theoretically should be. Like Kirito makes the point of, like, based on what he knows about Ronier and Ties, like, they had their own children, which is why they have the two kind of like descendant pilots with them in this moment. So how do they still only look like in their mid-20s? And there's this mystery about, like, wait, what happened here? Did they, like, abandon their kids at, like, a really young age or something like that? But this just gets revealed to be, they chose to go into deep freeze with Selka to be around her so she wouldn't be alone when she did this. This is part of the Integrity Knights switching over to being Integrity pilots. Every knight was given the choice to go into deep freeze or to continue on into the pilot program, and it seems like we're going to get that revealed over the course of these next couple of volumes. Which knights kind of lived their lives and are potentially, like, quote-unquote dead, and then which ones are still in deep freeze and can be still active in the present day story. So that's what we're dealing with there. The other thing here is that I guess we get the idea that the kind of age pausing kind of administrator stuff going on is also something that Ronier and Ties did, because they established at some point in the book that, like, they were in their, like, 70s or 80s or something like that when they went into deep freeze. So they were completely there throughout their children's lives. They just remained kind of looking young throughout the whole thing. So that sort of, I guess, makes sense with the magic systems we're kind of dealing with in here. A way to really highlight this is that we also do meet the character Eri, the kind of flying platform operator that we got introduced to in the Alization arc and stuff like that. So she's here. It's revealed that she actually played quite an important role over the last couple hundreds of years in terms of, like, a lot of the maintaining dragon craft stuff and all this sort of information. So she gets a little bit of focus in here, but again, it's nothing too crazy. It's interesting that she's here. She's a character who is kind of, like, changed from her very specific existence that she had just operating that platform in that shaft all that time, and now she has more freedom and stuff like that. So, her little bit of character growth is quite nice. But the problem is, how do we get them out of deep freeze? Because this is where we bring up the history of, like, well, it's a historical thing that, like, Selka, along with some of the others, figured out how to do deep freeze, and, like, the Star King and Queen were involved in this as well, and none of the rest of us know actually what to do with this. And of course, Kirito and Asuna throughout the whole thing are kind of like, I don't really remember a lot of this. I guess this was us. Some of this stuff, it does make sense. That is something Asuna would do. That is something Kirito would do. And so he's kind of forced to admit that, like, I guess I was the Star King. And Asuna, of course, accepts that she was the Star Queen. But they still don't know all of this stuff. But they come to the conclusion that what they need to do is they need to find out wherever the secret of deep freeze was hidden. And it eventually gets revealed that it was hidden on the planet Admina, basically, the kind of moon of the planet, and so that's where they have to go. So they have to use the Star King's dragon craft to go to the planet Admina, but there's only 2 seats. So it's decided that the people that are going to go is going to be Kirito, and it's going to be Oiline, however you pronounce his name, and the Yu-Gi-Oh guy who's not actually Yu-Gi-Oh. But they're still teasing that, of course. He's wearing a mask. Otherwise, he very clearly looks like Yu-Gi-Oh in so many ways. what's going on here. This is one of the mysteries, of course, that we are waiting for. So this is where we get the kind of splitting up of the characters. Basically, a lot of the girls kind of stay behind. They have like a kind of scene in the bath where like they just kind of like talk about stuff. And I think this is where we get some of the history on the whole Integrity Knight stuff. We don't cut back to it too much. Most of it is focused on the kind of secret undercover mission that Kirito and Eoline are going ahead with, because they establish here that they are not doing this with the permission of like either planet / country. So they're going to have to go in there under kind of cover in secret to kind of get this stuff. So, you know, of course, Eoline is the one to pilot. They get there, but they immediately come under attack once they arrive sort of close to the atmosphere of the planet. And we get introduced to this idea of these kind of like living missiles type thing. It's these kind of black worm things that seem to track onto their kind of heat signature. And this is what actually takes out the ship. And what ends up happening is as they crash, I think one of them is still left. And Kirito uses incarnation to basically stop it in place and realize that, wait, this is some sort of a unusual living creature. And he realizes that like there's no way that this creature just exists to be like a living missile. So it must be under control in some way. So he kind of uses incarnation, takes this kind of controlling thing out of its head. And so this creature is back to normal and is then guiding them to a facility where they find basically the creature's kind of mother, which is revealed to be one of the divine beasts of this world. Now, they sort of allude to the fact here that the abyssal horror is sort of a quote-unquote divine beast, but one where it's not a respected creature in the world, so they were fine with the fact that that one needed to be taken out. But otherwise, the idea is that these creatures are meant to be respected. They have their own locations in the world, and they are meant to be treated well. And this is one of the babies, effectively, this worm thing is one of the babies of this divine beast. And it's revealed that there's a whole facility built around, I suppose, forcing this creature to give birth and then using its offspring as these sort of living, heat-seeking missile type things. And so there's a big mystery kind of going on in all of this as we figure out like, okay, what's going on here on this planet? Like, there's already been some setup of like the kind of political situation going on here, and now there's an organization here doing all of this. Then we get introduced to the character Istar. Now, they don't establish in this volume if this character is male or female. They point out that this is this kind of androgynous looking character who they just note is very, very attractive, beautiful in many ways. In terms of the reveal about who this is, the only thing that they kind of allude to is that the power that this character ends up using, their kind of weapon control art, is a gun that makes this sort of anti-incarnation field. And the way that that feels to Kirito is very similar to the way Mudasina's Noose of the Accursed felt. So if they're making a connection here very, very directly, this would maybe suggest that whoever Mudasina is can also go to the Underworld and is this character Istar. And are they suggesting that there's basically another real worlder who has access to the Underworld and has a deeper life within here, like, say, Kirito has? The way that Kirito actually kind of, quote-unquote, grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! That is part of his history. Are they establishing that with someone else, or what's going on here? If you want to make the connection to all these characters, are we trying to say Mudasina is Shikimi Komura and these two characters are also Istar here? It's a little bit unclear. But it's revealed that this is the commander kind of controlling this whole situation. And eventually this character spots Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's a bunch of incarnation stuff that ends up happening here. Eoline reveals that he can... what's it called, like hollow incarnation or something like that, which is basically he can use his powers to basically mask their existences, that like you can't trace where they are with incarnometers. And it's just a warning to Kirito to be careful when you use your incarnation. So, eventually she spots them. Like I say she, we don't actually know for sure. But if the theory is right, maybe that's the way they're going. Who actually knows? But they fire an incarnation like sword attack at them. Eoline kind of collapses from the overuse of this kind of masking ability, and we just build up to effectively Eoline eventually regaining his senses, and the two of them engaging in combat. And all of this is happening while they're trying to basically kind of free the divine beast from the control here, so it's not being tortured anymore. And the whole idea here is it's this kind of crazy incarnation battle where it's revealed that, yes, Kirito has a higher raw power level with incarnation, but on a technical level, in terms of doing fancy things with incarnation, he seems to be a little bit far behind these other characters. They're able to do the incarnation flight and just have a fight in the air, basically. They're having a crazy sword fight using incarnation that Kirito kind of watches from a distance. This is where it is revealed that the two of them know each other. So Eoline and Istar know each other quite well. They kind of grew up together, and they were the final of the Unification Sword Tournament one year. And it's revealed that, incarnation was banned. They're not allowed to use it in that tournament. Eoline won. But otherwise, they're trying to, I think, suggest the idea that just with using incarnation powers, Istar is more powerful than Eoline. So what's the situation here? Because again, it's Eoline Herlent, but he is adopted. We don't actually know who his parents are and what the Yu-Gi-Oh connection actually is. This then suggests, like, okay, there's a history of the kind of quote-unquote Yu-Gi-Oh clone with this newer character who might be a real-worlder. What are we doing here? What does this all mean? Why is there research? Why have they captured like a divine beast? This suggests that like there's a sense for like these people have, they don't care about some of the kind of cultural things about how to treat these divine beasts, and that is a bit of a problem. So Eoline stays in the fight. What happens? They have a huge clash where they go like all out. They do like a sonic leap at each other. They both shatter their swords, but it's of course revealed that Istar's perfect control is the reincarnation gun. So, incarnation gun. I forget the exact order of events here, but at some point Kirito, I think it's just prior to this actually, Kirito realizes he needs some help here. He doesn't exactly know how to jump in and help this fight with Eoline, but he also realizes that like the group is about to basically destroy this base with the divine beast in it. Oh no, wait. They are, what's happening here? I think they're transporting the divine beast away on a giant dragon craft, and they're going to blow up the facility afterwards. So what he needs is to stop this explosion from just ruining the place. He also needs to stop the ship and get involved in the fight. So he realizes, I kind of need Asuna and Alice here, but they're a huge distance away, an astronomical distance away. What do I do? So this is an example of Kirito doing an insane thing with incarnation, where he just imagines like, okay, if this is how it works, and I've seen the others kind of use it in different ways, I'll just do what it is, which is just the kind of ability to make kind of your will manifest. And he's just kind of like, okay, I'm going to make a door out of like crystal elements. And basically this door, distance is not a thing. I'm imagining where Asuna and Alice are, and when I open this door, it is directly where that is. And so he's like, yes, opens the door, and he immediately is just kind of like, I don't know what you're doing right now, but I need you guys in here to help me do this. And the two of them do actually come out of the door. So Kirito has made some sort of a teleportation door that, basically allows them to travel insane distances. So Asuna and Alice come out. Alice is tasked with stopping the ship. Asuna is tasked with using her Stasia powers to, what is it? I forget the exact detail. It's to raise the land up so that it doesn't damage something else. I forget the exact details of it, but either way, the two of them come in. They stop all this from happening. This is, I think, the point at which Kirito tries to get involved in the fight, but the weapon art kind of happens, the incarnation happens, and everyone sort of like crashes down. And eventually they're forced into retreat. Like, everyone falls out of the sky. Istar saves themselves using wind elements to block their fall, and then like gets away. This is where the Divine Beast actually kind of like speaks up for itself, and is just like, it's kind of actually a cool reveal, because the Divine Beast is just like Dark King, White Queen, Golden Knight, and then to Eoline is like, and Blue Swordsman. It's nice to kind of see you all again. So there's another thing of like a divine beast of the world of the underworld referring to Eoline as the Blue Swordsman, which is interesting. That's kind of Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of title to a certain degree. What's going on there? But the divine beast obviously knows Star King Kirito, and is like, thank you for saving my child. I will now fulfill my duty with the thing you told me to protect. And effectively, this is where we get the idea of the treasure, of the truth about the deep freeze art. So they get that, and it's just like a thing with a bunch of like, what is it, like powder that like undoes deep freeze. So it's not even like this is how you just perform the technique. It's just like a reversal thing. It's a bit weird, but you know, it solves the problem that we need. We eventually go back, we unfreeze Salka, happy reunion with Alice. The others then unfreeze Ronye and Tisei, and we just get some really quick, you know, dialogue, nothing hugely significant, with the cliffhanger ending being Tisei coming out of the ice to confront someone who looks identical to Yu-Gi-Oh. That's the tease, is that she sees Eoline and is like, what? Now, it's a bit of a weird situation, because the idea is that at this point, like, Tisei, like, has had a child, like, has a husband, or had a husband. So it's a bit weird to kind of come back to this, but I understand what they're sort of trying to do. No, currently they haven't explained to us what exactly the situation is, like, with who they married. I think we assume, perhaps, with Tisei that it was Renly, because at least that was set up in the previous thing. And that would make sense to, like, a certain degree. I forget, were we told that before in terms of history? I forget exactly the details of that. But anyway, at least that was set up there somewhere. Ronye, I don't think we really have any sense, like, at all. But maybe in the coming volumes we'll finally get that. And you see, like, there's more and more mysteries coming out here relating to stuff that, like, obviously Mooncradle didn't explore, didn't explain. But that is pretty much the ending of the book. It literally ends on that note. Of just like, yeah, Eoline, her lens, she was staring at him. That's it. So it is the same cliffhanger kind of once again. They've done this like a couple of volumes now in a row of just like, it's Yu-Gi-Oh guy. It's frozen people. It's frozen people now realizing that it might be clone of Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, it's just, like, reusing similar cliffhangers over and over again. And it's obviously, it's just like, and find out next in the next volume. And it's just like, okay, fine, I get it. I'm interested. I'll get the next volume. But I do wish there was a little bit more of a sense of just us making a bit more progress, trying to figure out what exactly we're doing here. Because, obviously, from a broad picture, there's some cool stuff going on. But it's very difficult to, in any way, try to interpret what is actually kind of happening here. Obviously, the overall plot of SAO is actually more about sort of like the use of technology in these games to assist with stuff like medical AI and now kind of Fluctlight technology. So what is the final stage? What would Kayaba want the final stage of his grand plan to kind of be? And it's like, okay, well, the seed is bringing all the games together into one. there's this other game that is like the kind of quote-unquote ultimate game, the Underworld, where there's actually kind of like this separate form of like actual true digital beings in it, with what the Floodlights are and what the inhabitants of Underworld are. We've already, with Alice to a certain degree, done the idea of bringing those people out into the real world with kind of robot bodies. The next stage, of course, would be sort of better robot bodies, I guess, but I suppose the Alice body already kind of is that. Is it just linking it all together into one giant kind of virtual game, and some stuff like that? I'm not entirely sure, because it feels like we're probably waiting for the next Kayaba appearance. Like, when is Kayaba going to, instead of doing something really enigmatic like he often is doing, mysterious, when is he just going to like appear and be like, hey, this is what I'm actually trying to do here, this is what it's all about? But then you have the complexities with the whole competition aspect of Unital Ring, of like, whoever gets to the center of Unital Ring first, like, will like receive everything. And, you know, one speculation I think in this volume thrown out was like, do you get like admin privileges in the game or something like that? Is that what they're talking about here? I'm not really sure. And I don't know, like, what they're trying to get at here. Is it maybe this idea of like some sort of a test, like the first person to get to the middle, are they immediately going to try and separate all the games, or is them all being contained in one turned into the ring? Is this actually what we actually want, where all of the games are now linked together? I suppose truly, in a way, creating this full like quote-unquote digital world, and especially if Underworld ever gets linked to it, that is kind of potentially one way to do it. Because they bring up a few interesting ideas like that, where like Oiline and Kirito, while they're talking, brings up the idea of like, when they get to Adminan, it's kind of like, well, there's only about like 5,000 people who live on Adminan. And Kirito realizes that, like, oh yeah, the reason, even though a lot of time has passed in the Underworld, the reason their population has not grown as much as it probably should have is because the population of the Underworld depends on the amount of light cubes that are actually available. And because active sort of, you know, growth of the project isn't really happening, that is just a limited supply. So any new ones that gets added only happens when light cubes are freed up from the death of other characters. So they sort of establish that there's like a 200,000 like limit effectively for the entire population of Underworld. So are they trying to kind of like find some way to maybe break that limit somehow? And how is that kind of theoretically possible? How does that all work? That's a kind of interesting situation. But interestingly, Kirito responds by saying like, oh, actually, like in our world, there's like 8 billion people, and like this, like Airline has been a pretty cool customer around Kirito, but him hearing that there's 8 billion people in the real world, like, just kind of literally blows his socks off. Like, he's absolutely stunned by this revelation, and he's kind of like, I would like to go see your world sometime. And I think that's in response to Kirito explaining that, like, okay, Admin is like a moon of this planet, but our moon works kind of like slightly differently, and he wants to see that. And he promises him, I'll bring you to the real world at some stage. So that's an interesting one. And another robot body, I guess, needs to be made, but it's a possibility to make it happen, I guess. And what's that going to do? What's that going to mean? It's interesting. So what are we doing here? Now, obviously, you look to the villains, I think, to some degree about what's happening here. If the kind of theory is perhaps true, that Shikimi Kimura is baby Mudasina and also Istar, that would suggest that because she is linked to one of the main companies, like, involved in the whole kind of like tech industry about this stuff, that would explain how she has knowledge of both like the games, but also of Underworld as well. Because we've been teasing for a while now the idea, I think this is from like a bunch of volumes ago, that there's some like mysterious intruder into the Underworld that no one really knows about. And so there's absolutely the tease that there's another real worlder in there somewhere. And so is it Istar? Probably. I'm not really sure though. It makes sense if, like, you know, Kirito's big power is crazy incarnation. This character's ability seems to be anti-incarnation kind of based powers. You know, that's a decent setup here. But what are we building up towards? I'm not really sure, because I've seen theories fly around the place, all over the place, that what if, as the Star King and Queen, Kirito and Asuna had a child in the Underworld? Now, you may be wondering, how does that work? Because, of course, they're kind of like digitized, basically, into this game. Well, I assume it would work the same way the birth of other Underworlders works, where it's like, a light cube, someone dies, light cube is freed up. They have a child, so one of the light cubes is now their digital quote-unquote child. And some of the theory is that what if Istar is their child? Because if you look at the image you get of them, it's kind of like, there's a little bit of kind of like Asuna there, but with like Kirito's kind of like hair color perhaps. And is that something that they're going for here? I don't really know. Because they're obviously pointing out that there is a huge chunk of time that no one knows about. Like, that it either happened so long ago, it's a secret, or like, obviously that Kirito and Asuna don't particularly remember. It's super hard to speculate about when there's just so little that we actually know. We're still in the early setup stages, I feel, ultimately, of this arc. And it feels like we've got a long way to go before we really make any progress. It feels like there's probably still at least 2-3 more kind of volumes that are going to be somewhat similar to this, because he notes that, like, it's a bit of a landmark that we finally got to the point where Selka, Ronye, and Tisei are back in the story. But I just don't know how much them just being involved now changes anything, because I'm a little unclear on what exactly the Underworld kind of plot is. There is a sense that it's sort of like we have to protect the Underworld. We have to make sure it doesn't get kind of like shut down. There's this thing of like it's being kept active in secret basically by Wrath, and you know, we have to protect it because it represents the furthest advancement in this field. So we need to protect it in that way. And so the question, I think, probably is, if you link the Underworld to Unital Ring, does that kind of solve the problem of like why it potentially needed to be shut down? But then it doesn't really solve the light cube problem. It's a weird situation ultimately. So I don't know. I don't really know what to make of that. But there's my speculation about like the broader scope of things here. Obviously, this one specifically, I feel like it was more introducing some key elements, moving the pieces around like a little bit. This one didn't particularly have a lot of, like, you would say, like big romantic moments, because Kirito and Asuna were like separated for most of the book. Like Yui, I barely even remember if she was even in the book like at all. The boss fight that like Silica and everyone else was involved in went like pretty well overall, but you know, there's nothing too much to say about it. So it's just like solid, but I'm waiting to see where we go here. And it's unfortunate that this is happening at a time when it feels like the releases of the volumes is probably happening like slower than it potentially like ever has, where I don't think there's any sign of Progressive Volume 9 anytime soon. I'm pretty sure Japan is just like one volume ahead. I think in October last year they got Volume 27, and they're waiting for Volume 28, which I don't think has a date yet, as far as I'm aware. It's just a thing that we know is of course coming at some point. So we're getting to a point now where, surprisingly, the English release, which has always been like light years behind the Japanese release, is now getting quite close because of how many projects Reiki Kawahara is involved with at this point. So, yeah, they're my thoughts on the new Sword Art Online volume, volume 26, Unital Ring number 5. If you have any questions, definitely let me know below. There's probably a few little details I maybe left out that maybe you have questions about, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.